Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world that worships comfort. We are told to avoid pain, to silence it, to medicate it, to distract ourselves from it. Yet the deeper truth of the psyche tells us something radically different. Pain is not merely suffering, it is initiation. What you call pain is often the soul demanding growth. There is no coming to consciousness without suffering. The seed does not become a tree without first splitting open in darkness. Likewise, you do not become who you truly are without enduring the breaking of who you once were. Pain has a way of interrupting the story we tell about ourselves. It arrives uninvited, often violently, and dismantles the fragile structures of certainty we have built over the years. We believe we know who we are, our strengths, our roles, our identity in the eyes of others, and then a single event shakes the foundation. A failure strips away our confidence. A betrayal shatters our trust. A loss empties the meaning from familiar routines. In that moment, what hurts most is not merely the circumstance, but the collapse of the image we held of ourselves. Yet this collapse is not an accident of fate. It is psychological necessity. As Carl Jung suggested, there is no coming to consciousness without suffering. The persona, the mask we present to the world, must eventually crack. We spend years constructing it carefully, the competent professional, the strong parent, the independent thinker, the admired friend. But beneath that mask lives a deeper, often neglected self. Pain acts as the force that breaks the mask open, exposing what lies beneath. When you are stripped of external validation, you begin to confront a terrifying but liberating question. Who am I without applause? When success disappears, you are forced to ask, who am I without achievement? When relationships end, you must ask, who am I when I stand alone? These are not comfortable questions. They destabilize the ego. They remove the illusions that once protected you from uncertainty. But within this destabilization lies the beginning of authenticity. For the first time, you are no longer performing, you are searching. Pain isolates you, and in that isolation, you meet yourself. Without distraction, without noise, without constant affirmation, you begin to hear the quiet voice of your own psyche. You notice patterns you ignored, you recognize fears you suppressed, you encounter desires that were never allowed expression. The suffering becomes a mirror, and in that mirror you see not the idealized version of yourself, but the raw, unfinished human being beneath it. This is the threshold of self-discovery. Many turn away at this point. They rush to numb the discomfort, through distraction, through blame, through denial. But the courageous remain with it. They allow the pain to speak, and pain does speak. It reveals where you were living falsely. It reveals where you were dependent on external structures for your sense of worth. It reveals where you betrayed your own values to maintain approval. In confronting these revelations, you may feel smaller at first, exposed, vulnerable. But vulnerability is not weakness, it is access. It gives you access to the deeper layers of your being. You begin to distinguish between the identity imposed upon you and the identity that emerges from within. Pain dismantles the false self so the true self can breathe. Think of the seed buried underground. Before it becomes a tree, it must crack. From the outside, that cracking appears like destruction, but from within, it is transformation. The pressure of the soil, the darkness, the confinement, these are not punishments, they are conditions for growth. Likewise, your suffering is not evidence of inadequacy. It is evidence of expansion. When you endure pain consciously, something shifts. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, what is this revealing about me? That shift changes everything. You move from victimhood to inquiry, from despair to awareness. And awareness is the beginning of strength. Self-discovery does not occur in comfort. Comfort preserves the familiar, pain challenges it. Comfort keeps you asleep in routine. Pain wakes you up abruptly. It demands that you examine your choices, your attachments, your fears, your unlived potential. It forces you into an encounter with your own depth. And in that depth, you discover resilience you did not know you possessed. You discover that your identity was never as fragile as you imagined. You discover that beneath the broken expectations lies an unbroken core, a self that is not defined by circumstances, but shaped by how you respond to them. This is the paradox. The very experience that makes you feel lost is guiding you home. The disorientation is part of the journey inward. The collapse of certainty is the doorway to wisdom. The pain that wounds you is also the pain that awakens you. If you dare to remain present with it, without fleeing, Without masking, without blaming, you will find that pain becomes teacher rather than enemy. It becomes the gateway through which you pass from unconscious living into conscious being. And on the other side of that gateway, you do not find a perfect version of yourself. You find a real one. And reality lived honestly, courageously, and consciously is the foundation of true strength. Within every human being there exists a territory that remains unexplored, not because it lacks importance, but because it intimidates us. This territory is what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is composed of everything you were taught to reject, suppress, or deny within yourself. The traits that were called unacceptable, the impulses that were labeled dangerous, the emotions that made others uncomfortable. Over time, you learned to push these elements into darkness, believing that by hiding them, you could become worthy of love, approval, or belonging. But what is buried does not disappear. The shadow does not dissolve simply because you refuse to look at it. It waits. It gathers energy. It influences your decisions, your reactions, your relationships, all from behind the curtain of consciousness. The anger you deny emerges as passive aggression. The ambition you suppress turns into resentment of other success. The vulnerability you hide transforms into emotional coldness. What you refuse to own begins to own you. And this is where pain becomes a revelation. When you are triggered, when someone's words ignite disproportionate rage, when jealousy overwhelms reason, when fear paralyzes you, you are not merely reacting to the present moment. You are encountering your shadow. The intensity of your reaction is a signal. It tells you that something within you has been disowned. Most people, when confronted with this discomfort, project it outward. They blame the world. They label others as the problem. They cling to moral superiority. Projection is easier than introspection. It protects the ego from the terrifying possibility that the darkness they see outside may also live within. But the individual who seeks strength must choose a different path. Instead of asking, "Why are they like this?" you ask, "What in me is being reflected?" Instead of condemning your anger, you investigate it. Instead of suppressing your envy, you examine what it reveals about your unlived desires. Instead of fearing your capacity for aggression, you ask how it might become courage or assertiveness when integrated consciously. The shadow is not evil, it is merely unconscious. Within your anger lies your capacity to defend boundaries. Within your jealousy lies your awareness of what you truly value. Within your fear lies your instinct for survival and discernment. Even your darker impulses contain life force energy. When denied, they become destructive. When acknowledged, they become transformative. The tragedy is not that humans possess darkness. The tragedy is that they refuse to recognize it. Strength does not arise from pretending to be purely virtuous. It arises from embracing your totality, light and dark alike. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim parts of yourself that were once fragmented. It is to say, yes, I am capable of anger. Yes, I am capable of selfishness. Yes, I am capable of pride. And in that honest admission, you paradoxically become more ethical, not less. For what is unconscious controls you. What is conscious, you can guide. There is immense power in owning your shadow. When you no longer waste energy suppressing it, that energy becomes available for creation. When you stop projecting your darkness onto others, your relationships become clearer and more authentic. When you accept that you are capable of both harm and healing, you become more responsible in your actions. To confront the shadow requires courage. It means stepping into psychological darkness without the comfort of moral certainty. It means admitting contradictions within yourself. It means facing the possibility that the traits you despise in others may mirror traits within you. This confrontation can feel humiliating at first. It dismantles the illusion of innocence. It reveals complexity where you once saw simplicity. But humiliation is often the doorway to humility, and humility is fertile ground for growth. When you integrate your shadow, you no longer fear your own depths. You are not shocked by your impulses, you understand them. You are not overwhelmed by your emotions. You learn from them. You become whole, and wholeness is strength. The individual who has faced their shadow walks differently in the world. They are less reactive because they recognize their triggers. They are less judgmental because they understand human frailty. They are less easily manipulated because they are aware of their own vulnerabilities. They carry a quiet confidence, not because they believe themselves perfect, but because they know themselves deeply. The shadow, once integrated, becomes a reservoir of vitality. What once expressed itself as uncontrolled rage becomes disciplined power. What once manifested as insecurity becomes empathy. What once appeared as destructive desire becomes creative drive. The energy has not vanished, it has been transformed. To deny the shadow is to remain divided. To integrate it is to become unified. And in that unity, you discover a strength that is not fragile, not performative, not dependent on external validation. It is rooted in self-knowledge. It is grounded in acceptance. It is forged in the courageous act of turning toward your own darkness rather than fleeing from it. The hidden power you seek is not outside you. It has been waiting in the shadows all along. The ego is a necessary structure. It gives you a sense of identity, continuity, and orientation in the world. It tells you, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I deserve. Without it, you would drift without direction. Yet the ego, though necessary, is not supreme. It is not the totality of who you are. It is only the surface, the conscious image you have constructed about yourself. And suffering has a peculiar relationship with this structure. When life unfolds according to your plans, the ego feels powerful. It believes it is in control. Success reinforces its narrative. Approval strengthens its certainty. Stability confirms its worldview. But when suffering enters through loss, humiliation, illness, rejection, or failure, the ego experiences something it cannot tolerate: powerlessness. In that moment, the carefully constructed identity begins to fracture. You may have believed yourself competent, and then you fail. You may have believed yourself indispensable, and then you are replaced. You may have believed yourself loved unconditionally, and then you are abandoned. The pain is not only in the event itself, it is in the collapse of the story you told about yourself. This collapse feels like death, and, psychologically, it is a kind of death. As taught by Carl Jung, profound transformation often requires what he described as a symbolic death, the breakdown of the old identity, so that a deeper self may emerge. The ego resists this process fiercely. It clings to control. It blames others. It searches desperately for a way to restore the previous image. But suffering does not negotiate. It dismantles. Yet, within this dismantling lies liberation. As long as the ego remains inflated, you are confined to its limitations. You are trapped within the need for validation, the fear of failure, the hunger for superiority, the anxiety of comparison. The ego constantly measures: am I winning? Am I admired? Am I admired? Am I secure? This constant measurement is exhausting. It binds you to external conditions for your sense of worth. Suffering interrupts this measurement. When you lose something fundamental, you are forced to confront a terrifying question. If everything I identified with disappears, what remains? At first, the answer feels like nothing. Emptiness, disorientation, a void where certainty once lived. But if you endure that void without rushing to fill it with distraction, something remarkable begins to happen. You discover that beneath the ego's noise, there is a deeper presence, quieter, steadier, less reactive. This presence does not panic when status shifts. It does not crumble when approval fades. It observes, it learns, it adapts. It is what Jung referred to as the self, the totality of your being, conscious and unconscious, far greater than the ego's narrow perspective. When suffering breaks the ego, it loosens its grip on your identity. You are no longer exclusively the role you played. You are no longer solely the success you achieved. You are no longer defined entirely by how others see you. The collapse creates space, and in that space, your deeper nature can emerge. Humility is born here. Humility is not humiliation. It is clarity. It is the recognition that you are neither omnipotent nor worthless, but human. It frees you from the burden of maintaining a flawless image. It allows you to admit uncertainty. It grants you compass for yourself and for others, because you understand fragility firsthand. When the ego is cracked open by suffering, empathy expands. You no longer judge others so quickly because you have felt your own limitations. You no longer cling so desperately to superiority because you have experienced vulnerability. The breaking softens you not into weakness but into depth. There is a paradox in this process. What feels like destruction is often refinement. Gold is purified by fire. Steel is strengthened through pressure. Likewise, your character is clarified through adversity. The superficial aspects of your identity burn away. What remains is essential. You begin to live less defensively. You become less concerned with proving yourself, and more concerned with understanding yourself. You realize that your worth does not depend on perpetual success. You see that failure, though painful, does not annihilate your being. It simply reveals where growth is required. Suffering strips illusions. It reveals that control is limited. It shows that life cannot be entirely engineered. And in accepting this, you paradoxically gain a deeper kind of stability. Not the stability of rigid control, but the stability of inner alignment. The ego wants certainty. The soul seeks wholeness. When the ego dominates, you chase achievements to feel complete. When suffering humbles the ego, you begin to search inward instead of outward. You recognize that completeness is not earned through comparison, but discovered through integration. To endure suffering consciously is to allow the ego to shrink into its proper place, not as tyrant but as servant. The ego becomes a tool rather than a master. It organizes your life, but it no longer defines your essence. And when that shift occurs, a quiet freedom emerges. You are freer from the need to impress, freer from the terror of imperfection, freer from the illusion that your identity must remain fixed. You become adaptable, resilient, grounded in something deeper than circumstance. Suffering breaks the ego, yes. It dismantles the structures that once felt permanent. But in that breaking, it frees the soul from confinement. It reveals that you are more expansive than your roles, more enduring than your failures, more profound than your fears. The fracture becomes an opening, and through that opening, your deeper strength begins to breathe. There is a kind of suffering that corrodes the spirit, and there is a kind of suffering that refines it. The difference between the two is not the intensity of the pain, nor the duration, nor even the nature of the loss. The difference is meaning. When pain appears senseless, it breeds bitterness. The mind circles endlessly around the question, why me? The heart tightens, resentment grows, life feels unjust, chaotic, hostile. In this state, suffering becomes a prison. It isolates you from hope and separates you from purpose. But when suffering is given meaning, something extraordinary happens. The pain does not vanish, yet it changes character. It becomes a teacher instead of a tormentor. It becomes a forge rather than a fire that merely burns. As emphasized by Carl Jung, the human psyche is not designed merely to endure hardship. It is designed to interpret it. We are meaning-making beings. When we cannot locate purpose within our trials, we feel psychologically fragmented. But when we discover, or consciously choose, a meaning within our suffering, we reclaim power. Meaning does not always arrive immediately. In the midst of loss, clarity is often absent. Grief clouds perception. Shock narrows awareness. It may take time before insight emerges. Yet the crucial step is the willingness to ask a different question. Instead of why is this happening to me, you begin to ask, what is this shaping within me? That shift transforms your posture toward adversity. You begin to see that pain may be refining qualities that comfort never could. Patience grows in long seasons of uncertainty. Courage forms when fear must be faced repeatedly. Compassion deepens when you have known despair. Discipline strengthens when you must rebuild after failure. These virtues are rarely born in ease. They are cultivated in struggle. Without meaning, suffering feels random. With meaning, it feels directional. Consider the individual who experiences betrayal. Without reflection, betrayal breeds cynicism. No one can be trusted. The heart closes. But if that same individual searches for meaning, they may discover stronger boundaries, clearer discernment, deeper self-respect. The wound becomes instruction. The betrayal becomes a catalyst. Stein for maturity. Failure. Failure can either confirm inadequacy or reveal hidden potential. It can either silence ambition or sharpen it. The event itself does not dictate the outcome. Interpretation does. When you decide that failure is information rather than condemnation, it transforms into fuel. Meaning requires conscious participation. It demands that you refuse passivity. Instead of being merely acted upon by life, you engage with it. You reflect. You analyze patterns. You confront your own contributions to the situation. You ask what must change within you. This does not mean romanticizing pain or pretending it is pleasant. Suffering hurts. Loss wounds. Grief tears at the heart. But to acknowledge pain is not the same as surrendering to despair. Meaning allows you to carry pain with dignity rather than collapse beneath it. There is also a deeper dimension to meaning, one that touches purpose. Sometimes suffering redirects your path. A career setback may push you toward work more aligned with your values. A broken relationship may awaken you to the need for emotional growth. A personal crisis may lead you into greater authenticity. What once felt like derailment reveals itself as redirection. Meaning transforms suffering into initiation. Initiation is not comfortable, it marks a transition from one stage of life to another. In ancient traditions, initiation involved trials, symbolic deaths, and rebirths. The old identity dissolved so that a stronger one could emerge. Psychologically, this pattern still holds. Suffering often signals that an old version of you can no longer survive. Something must evolve. When you interpret pain as part of your evolution rather than evidence of your inadequacy, resilience increases. You stop resisting reality and begin cooperating with growth. You become less concerned with fairness and more concerned with transformation. There is also empowerment in recognizing that meaning is, in part, chosen. Even when circumstances are beyond your control, your interpretation remains within your domain. This does not deny injustice or tragedy, it asserts agency within them. You may not control what happened, but you can decide what it will make of you. Will it make you hardened or wise, closed or discerning, bitter or purposeful? Power lies in that decision. When suffering acquires meaning, endurance becomes purposeful, sacrifice feels significant, tears become sacred rather than shameful. You recognize that you are being shaped, not randomly, but intentionally, through your engagement with experience, and as meaning deepens, gratitude can even coexist with pain, not gratitude for the hurt itself, but gratitude for the strength it uncovered, the clarity it forced, the depth it revealed. You begin to see that without certain trials, you would have remained asleep to parts of yourself. Suffering without meaning crushes the spirit, suffering with meaning builds it. The transformation is internal. The external event may remain unchanged, but your relationship to it evolves. You stand taller not because the storm ceased, but because you understand why you are walking through it. In this understanding, pain ceases to be merely something to escape. It becomes something to integrate. It becomes a chapter in your narrative of growth. It becomes a source of power, not because it was gentle, but because you faced it consciously and allowed it to shape you. And in that shaping, you discover that strength is not the absence of wounds but the wisdom drawn from them. There is a destiny within you that does not belong to anyone else, a pattern, a calling, a psychological blueprint that seeks expression. Yet this destiny is not fulfilled by imitation, nor by obedience to collective expectations. It is realized through individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. This process is not gentle. Individuation demands separation from the unconscious patterns you inherited, from family conditioning, cultural expectations, societal roles, and even your own outdated self-concepts. It requires that you confront the tension between who you were taught to be and who you are meant to become, and that confrontation creates heat. As described by Carl Jung, individuation is the movement towards psychological wholeness, the integration of conscious and unconscious elements into a unified self. But integration does not occur in comfort. It occurs in conflict. It occurs when the life you are living no longer aligns with the deeper truth within you. That misalignment feels like suffering. You may feel restless in a career that once seemed secure. You may feel disconnected in relationships that once defined you. You may sense an inner voice urging change while fear demands stability. This tension is the friction of growth. It is the fire in which individuality is forged. To individuate is to disappoint expectations. Sometimes others, sometimes your own. It may mean leaving environments that no longer nourish your growth. It may mean confronting beliefs you once defended. It may mean acknowledging desires that contradict the persona you carefully constructed. Each of these acts feels like loss. You lose certainty, you lose approval, you lose familiarity. But what you gain is authenticity. Fire destroys what is superficial and preserves what is essential. Likewise, the trials of individuation burn away borrowed identities. The masks begin to melt. The roles you played automatically no longer fit comfortably. You can no longer live solely to satisfy external standards because something deeper within you refuses to remain silent. Refusal is not rebellion for its own sake. It is the psyche's demand for wholeness. Wholeness includes your light and your shadow, your strengths and your vulnerabilities, your ambitions and your fears. To individuate is to claim responsibility for all of it. You stop blaming your past for your stagnation. You stop projecting your unrealized potential onto others. You accept that your growth is your task, and this acceptance is heavy. There will be moments when loneliness accompanies this journey. When you step away from collective conformity, you may feel isolated. When you begin to speak with your own voice, not everyone will understand. When you change, some relationships may fall away. Individuation often requires standing alone before you can stand whole. It is space for integration. In solitude, you begin to recognize your own rhythms rather than living according to imposed timelines. You hear your own convictions more clearly. You feel your own limits and your own capacities without comparison. You discover that your worth is not determined by fitting into predefined molds. The fire of individuation also demands courage in action. Insight alone is insufficient. Once you become aware of your authentic direction, you must move toward it. That movement is frightening because it involves risk. You may fail, you may struggle, you may encounter resistance. But stagnation becomes more painful than risk. This is how you know the fire is doing its work. What once felt safe begins to feel suffocating. What once seemed impossible begins to feel necessary. You realize that comfort without authenticity is a slow erosion of the soul. So you step into uncertainty, not recklessly, but consciously. And with each step, strength deepens. Individuation does not create perfection. It creates alignment. You still face difficulties. You stint. You'll experience doubt. But your struggles now serve growth rather than avoidance. You are no longer running from yourself. You are moving toward yourself. The person forged in this fire is different. They are less easily manipulated by trends or pressures. They possess an inner compass. They have faced their contradictions and integrated them. Their confidence is not loud because it does not need constant validation. It is grounded in self-knowledge. They understand that life will continue to test them. New fires will arise. But they no longer fear the flames as destruction alone. They recognize them as refinement. To individuate is to accept that your path will not be identical to another's. It is to embrace responsibility for your becoming. It is to endure the burning away of illusions so that your authentic form can emerge. Strength, through pain, culminates here. Not in dominance, not in external applause, but in wholeness. When you allow yourself to be forged, when you endure the necessary heat of transformation, you do not merely survive. You emerge integrated, conscious, aligned with your deeper self, and that alignment is unshakable strength. Do not curse your wounds, study them. Within them lies the blueprint of your evolution. The world may see your scars as weakness, but psychologically, scars are proof of integration. You are not strong because you avoided pain. You are strong because you endured it consciously. Remember this. With cave you fear to enter, holds the treasure you seek. Walk into your darkness, face your shadow, endure your trials. And from the depths of suffering, you will rise, not hardened, not bitter, but whole.